Good morning, everyone. Welcome to the Explicit Measures podcast with Tommy, Seth, and Mike. We're back again for another week of fun and enjoyment and random conversations. So, good morning, everyone.
Happy Tuesday.
Welcome back. We were just discussing off camera. We have a whole bunch of fun, random sayings that we use all the time. Things like "that's a game changer" or "Seth's awfully quiet," or Tommy's gonna, just funny phrases that act like the business, think like IT.
Yeah,
Tommy,
let me rephrase
what do you think?
said. Let me rephrase what you said.
Yeah, let me rephrase what you said. And then we're thinking like, well, we should be making merchandise around this. So we'll have to start taking some time. We'll have to throw some swag in our store around some of our fun phrases that we've been enjoying and having some fun with. We're on episode 75, but before we begin, we would be remiss if we didn't kind of talk about one of our favorite community members here. Charles Sterling, for those of you who know him or have hung around him a little bit in the Power BI and now Power Platform community, has made an interesting announcement on Twitter. I'll kick it over to Tommy. What was the announcement, Tommy?
I guess interesting is one way to put it, but Chuck Sterling, who was project manager for Power BI for a long time, has retired.
He is a long-running Microsoftie.
29 years, I think? He's been at Microsoft. He started on Windows, Windows something.
Excel, I thought it was Excel Help Desk. That was originally
Windows software, then Excel, and then obviously he became the product manager for Power BI, and then that's where we all met him because he was dynamic. Yeah, we'll get into that, and then he ran Power Apps for a little too. So
he's been all over, had his hands all over the Microsoft platform. So we've had kind of an amazing experience with Chuck. We really appreciate Chuck and him investing in us, right? Kind of encouraging us to kind of come out of our shells a bit and present and encourage more community-based things. I'll kick it over to Seth. Thoughts?
Yeah, man. If Chuck was still the guy in the community, in the Power BI community, I probably would be still crying with the announcement.
Yeah.
And there's two reasons, man. When we engage with him, obviously Power BI community, right? But he was probably the best community organizer and individual that I've ever had the pleasure to work for. And you, I say that in jest, right? But working alongside with him, because he had a knack to do two things better than anyone I've ever met. And those are using people's interests and aligning those interests to set them up to succeed.
Yep.
Right? Because if you think we being an MVP, engaging with the community, like Chuck was always there to give you the next thing, go do the presentation. It was kind of like, I think he said, paint my fence in the Tom Sawyer kind of thing, where you have a bunch of individuals that are motivated to be part of a community, and he just unlocked doors for people all over the place. And obviously that was, he was doing his job that way. But when you engaged with him, you always felt fantastic. And it was a lot of fun working with him. And then the other thing was he had this amazing knack to connect the right people together. And a direct result of that is this podcast, because he introduced Tommy to us. I recall day one, I don't even think Tommy was at the conference yet. I was like, you guys got to meet this guy from Florida. His name is Tommy. And we were like, okay.
Yeah. So we tried to hire Tommy, but Tommy said no. He didn't like us yet. So that's another whole part of the story.
I think about all of the people and relationships that Chuck created with an introduction, blows my mind. Yeah. Right? Chuck's a fisherman, right? So I was trying to think of an analogy, but it just didn't work out here, and it wasn't as cool. But a lot of what Chuck did was weave people together.
Yep.
And the result of that is amazing communities of people. Imagine your years of work visible in that sense.
Yeah,
right?
Totally.
I would imagine Chuck has one of the largest and coolest tapestries ever created around Microsoft products by his ability to connect the right people at the right time.
When you've been there for 29 years, you obviously learn people across the product line. You just learn things. And I was at Johnson Controls for 10 years, and you just kind of, as you work through many different departments, as you keep moving through, you learn where people are and who works on what. And, you know, if I tap them on the shoulder, we've kind of worked on some things together that can help us out here. But again, a lot of it, I think, I think for sure, I love your comment around Chuck was there to connect the right kind of people together to get them to figure out how to do something better together than they would be apart from working together as a team, kind of thing.
Well, the same story at Embassy. I met him because he was great friends with Ted Pattison, who used to be a Power Apps, and in the whole spirit. And Chuck always loves fishing, so he'd always go to Florida, always go to Tampa. Met him, and then that led to when we went to Atlanta. He's like, "Oh, there are two guys you have to meet, Mike and Seth." I said, "Oh, I know who they are." He's like, "No, you have to meet them." And yeah, I mean, the rest is pretty much history. But he was the first speaker that I saw that I'll never forget. Like, it was the first conference I went to in New York, and he was just speaking like, "Oh, you can make this really fun. You can make this incredibly fun." So, yeah, Chuck has definitely been an inspiration, and there's not many people that you could directly say my life would be very different had I not met him, like professionally. I probably wouldn't be in Chicago.
Yep.
So
yeah, he is a lot to be proud of, even if like in the time span I knew him.
Yep.
Right. Like
we didn't know him that long at all. We're at the end of the career. Yeah.
You know, I hope he enjoys his retirement, where he's probably just going to go fishing every single day. So
I think that sounds like a fair. So Chuck is an avid fisherman, and his educational was a marine biologist,
marine biology or something.
Yeah. So there wasn't a whole lot of money in marine biology back in the day, but computers were 29 years ago. So that seemed to be a better alternative to jump into. So Chuck, thank you very much for impacting us. Thank you for connecting Tommy, Mike, and Seth. We have thoroughly enjoyed working together, so we really appreciate you. Congratulations on the retirement. We encourage you to have lots of fun, do lots of scuba diving and fun fishing things. Thank you very much for investing in us, and we're hoping to pay it forward a little bit by investing more into our community and the Power BI community in general to keep doing podcasts and free content and training and kind of helping people along down this journey as well. So thank you very much. This is our formal thank you. We appreciate you. And we really wish you best retirement. Hopefully we'll meet up with you in the future and do fun things as well, and it won't have to be all Power BI related or conference related anymore. Anyways, all right, jumping into today's topic, Tom, you want to give us kind of a run through of the topic for today?
So this is again for 75. I'm excited for this one. We're basically talking about. We've always talked about the product, using the product, but this is the one where it's a little out of our control in terms of the other services you can connect to Power BI. And this came from one of our offline conversations about what do you connect to in Power BI? Because obviously we always talk about the prime stars, the all-stars, SQL, APIs, Google Analytics, Excel, but there's again over 200 connections, over 200 sources that you can connect to.
Yep.
So it's basically like our own stories or successes with other services. And then that led to another conversation on basically there's still a lot missing, and is that always the best option? So that's kind of the outline for today.
Awesome. There is a lot here, and so we've kind of tried to cater some of the talks here recently around just talking some technical shop around the tool itself. So this is going to be kind of a deep dive of the services, and actually this is a good lead in. Seth and I, when we were doing interviews for people who had Power BI skills, one of the questions we would kind of ask in the interview would be, what kind of data sources have you connected to, and what kind of challenges did you find with connecting to those various data sources? So that's always interesting to listen to what people connect to and like where they in an interview question type space, ask people what they connected to. But in addition to that, ask a follow-up question kind of a little bit deeper around which one was the hardest one? Which connection gave you the most problems? Because then you can kind of start teasing out a little bit another layer deeper as, well, just because you connected to Salesforce, okay, fine, you can make the connection. But did you have to build any kind of real relevant reporting around it? And that kind of gets teased out when you actually start asking, like, how did you actually connect to things? What were you actually doing in it? And which one was the hardest? So it'll be interesting to see what you guys have connected to as well. I'll kick it off to here to Seth, a question to Seth. Seth, maybe, give us maybe one or two sources that you've kind of connected to, and we'll take it from there.
SQL.
SQL is like the easy one, right?
I mean, it's it's the easy button, man.
Yeah.
Right? So it probably works the best for obvious reasons.
Well, it's a Microsoft product. It better work really good.
Yeah. So the benefits of SQL, obviously query folding. Right?
Yes. You want to explain that? Explain that real quick, just for people who aren't familiar with query folding.
So basically, it's when you make the connection and when whatever you're doing in Power Query essentially is going to make a call back to and fold that into a query in the SQL Server, so it executes a lot faster when it's pulling the data.
Yeah. I'm going to add a little bit to that. There are certain buttons you press in the Power Query interface that are just known SQL commands, right? It knows that if you select column 1 and 2 and remove all others, it knows that you're picking two columns, right? So that in SQL equivalent land, selecting columns is add these columns, select this column, that column from table name. So there's a level of like interpretation that Power Query is doing for us. It's interpreting your button clicks as SQL statements, kind of thing.
Yeah. So as we've said many different times, it's very easy to connect to a table. We use views a lot because that's the layer in between your raw tables that you can start to do some transforms in that layer and clean your data or join it together, simplify the experience that you're going to have in Power BI, because one of the things you don't want to do is bring your relational database as the same thing into your Power BI model, because a relational database model in the Power BI file is not a good way to go. It's going to create, it's going to shoot you right over to SQL BI, where you go, how do I do this in DAX?
Yes.
And they're going to be like, start over.
And I think this is a very important note to make here for people who are trying to use SQL Server as a data source, right? Again, one of our best practices, I think, in general would be use a view before you use a table coming out of SQL, right? So the view can help you with like data type transformations, where you don't have to go back and rewrite the data table. One thing that's a pain inside SQL, if you make a table in SQL with the wrong data type, and you need to update that SQL table with a different data type, some data type changes will be very painful, and you can't do it very easily. So that's one reason why you want to use the view, because sometimes Power BI is picky about, hey, you're sending me a date field, but if I'm using incremental refresh, I need that to be a date time field. And so what you can do upstream of that is in the view, just say, oh, this is a date column, but it's just going to be a date time column. And then Power BI can understand it. And then now you can query fold things a little bit easier now.
It's actually probably one of the biggest traps that tech folks fall into, is thinking that they can just pull existing tables and rebuild the relationships in a Power BI file.
Agreed. I mean, you can, but
if that's
it comes with downsides.
If that's the easy button in the enterprise space, what's the easy button, guys, in the business side?
And here's the thing, though. We're talking about SQL, which is obviously the default. It should be. If you could put anything to SQL, obviously that's like our best practice. If there's an API connection, we use our database engineers or developers to create a SQL connection to that and then pull that, because then you have a local.
Yes.
But this is obviously the default for everyone. I think a lot of people, like, there's just sometimes not a lot of alternatives. SQL is also, I believe, one of the only ones, I think there's only like 3 or 4, where the query folding and the ability to do those transformations beforehand is possible.
Yes.
Unless you have that ability in an API. But for most of these connections, most of these external services, you can't do that. You're kind of faced with the raw data.
Well, so herein lies some of this, call it voodoo, call it magic. I don't know what you want to call it here, but when you look at other systems, right? So you look at your company, right? Your company is going to purchase some stuff from Microsoft, right? You're going to have some products there. Some companies choose not to do that. Some people choose, well, the Microsoft product suite doesn't meet all their needs. Like, for example, like a Confluence or a Jira might be a better way of managing your team. Where this starts creating, let's call it a little bit of friction for whatever reporting you're going to do, those other systems are now have an interface, has a website, and users are entering data in there. And sometimes the data is not always stored in a SQL Server format. So there's 2 options here. You can either go to that source system and try to lift out the data you need and put it into SQL Server, which is a very valid requirement and or potentially opportunity, right? Or, and where I think the market and where the industry in general around data is going in general is companies haven't even fully realized the power of APIs. So application protocol interfaces, APIs, I think that's what it's called. Someone's going to correct me on the chat. I'm probably wrong on that, but the API is key to how companies and businesses and data systems talk to each other now. And I think you started to see the rise of this with like this whole microservice architecture stuff. And then now we're seeing like, if you're a company and you're building some sort of application, you better have an API. I better have a way of accessing the data programmatically as opposed to just always having you dump it to Excel.
Right.
And so I think right now we're seeing a shift where many markets or industries are now turning everything on as APIs, and anything new techie company stuff, everything comes with an API now. So I think there's a general trend here that's not finished yet, and we're going to continue to see more tools turn on with APIs. And what that gives us now is we can go back to these Jiras and Confluences of the world and go lift out the data directly. You can get like an OData feed, which is now like a table that you can go hit and it returns results to you. You can now go.
Everyone's favorite OBCD.
That is ODBC.
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 So that's another connection type. But as companies become more equipped to support their applications with APIs, I think you're going to find a lot. Yeah, P is for programming. Thanks, Joe.
James.
No, there's another one. Okay, James also. Yeah, application programming interface. That's right. P is for programming. But as you look through more of this stuff, it's going to be. I think the game's going to change here. So I think this also brings up another good source. So Seth, you talked about IT and SQL. I think I find a lot of value. I was just talking with another training client this week. Folders and pulling things out of SharePoint or pulling things out of Excel files. That's from the business side. I mean, that is our world. I mean, that is most of what we do, because at the business level, we're not really given access to the API level all the time. And so a lot of our systems that have data in them will build a table of data and we'll export it. And so I think a huge automation thing here for the business side of things from an automation standpoint, we don't technically have access to SQL Server all the time. And therefore we'll loading from folder, I think, is probably one of my favorite connectors, because the scalability of which that helps you. Let me just say this. People undervalue I'm trying to use the right words here because I want to make a strong statement here. People undervalue the automation that can occur when you load things from a folder. The same data coming in the same way every day, every month, whatever that is, the amount of time you can save is immense. And you really need to learn that concept and utilize that from the business side, because I've seen it save thousands of hours within companies and provide capabilities they could never do before. And I'll pause there.
When we're dealing with APIs, and I think even SharePoint too, the folder, the automation side, because you're kind of going to another side of this, of the scalability, and also the correlation between the service and Power Queries, not your skill in Power Query, because you become limited once you're dealing outside of SharePoint, or when you're dealing outside of SQL. If you have limited knowledge or your skills in Power Query, your ability to, in a sense, loop or pagination. And this is the same thing with folders, being able to do try or if statements. We had the same issue, Mike, with SharePoint, or we had an issue where we were loading things from a folder, but the way the folders were coming in, the way the sources would come in, the tab names would change.
Yes.
By either it would be like the abbreviation or the long version.
Yes.
So, and the hundreds of files in
there. And this is my point, right? This is one of my biggest downsides to SharePoint and folders, is because typically there's a human involved somewhere in that process. And as soon as you put people manipulating data, and again, this is really depends. Like let's say internally to my company, I can go to a business objects and export something. Great. The report will be very consistent as long as you don't change the definition of the report. So in certain cases, you'll get a great, reliable feed of data. In other applications, like let's say I'm going to a client and they're sending me data. Well, what typically was happening is at the client application or the client side, they're throwing an analyst at this. They're doing the extract. They're pulling the data together, and they're naming the tabs whatever makes sense to them. So you're not getting consistently named stuff. And so now we have to handle a lot of dirty data inside these folder loads, and that's not fun. And it's, again, to your point, you got to be sharp on the Power Query skills.
Yeah, and
Agreed.
I think the analogy that I just thought of is the sequel is kind of like visiting the zoo. Once you go outside the sequel, you go inside the gate. You're in and out in the Serengeti, because you're gonna have some weird sources. We're also, if you ever dealt with JSON, it's like a record and a record. What do you do? Which one do you click on?
Yep.
Understanding how to, again, scale that out and get structured data, because a lot of times too, and when we're dealing with our APIs, you are not going to have your structured data, and not even like, oh, I just need to, like, the dashboard in a day where it's like just the delimiter commas, like the address. It is some weird, it's a JSON inside of a JSON, or just your ability to say, why are only 5 records coming back? Well, that's because something with Power Query, because you actually, there's some parameter that needs to be updated. So I would say for me, by far, the language or my skill in Power Query is on the connection side, or that's where a lot of times invested. You can obviously apply it to other parts in Power Query, but where I've tried to learn and when I've been needed to grow my skills, it's been on connecting to various sources or various APIs that come in a different way. I think you have to have that ability to
You're saying unstructured data is your focus right now? Like,
no, I think, more, it's not, again, I think it's much different than your unstructured data from dashboard in a day where the column headers are wrong or there's different columns missing. It can come in depending on the API, there's a lot of puzzle solving.
So the API, it depends on what the API connects to, is what you're saying.
Right.
Structured versus unstructured. Yeah.
Right.
Well, and then it's basically the medium of JSON. JSON is made for developers, basically, is my opinion, right? It's a developer generated structure that is, it's a very simple structure. It's a key value pair, right? It has a key that identifies what is the data, and then it has a value of whatever that data point is.
Right.
The interesting part, and this is how I mentally think about it, one JSON file potentially can have many relationships. Right. So there's these things called arrays inside the JSON file. And if you have arrays or objects inside an array, you have this concept of like, I can have 10 rows of data that actually match to a single key or, data object of whatever that element is. So this, in my mind, a single JSON object potentially can be its own data model just by itself. Right. And so to unwind that
the complex
that gets hard,
objects, right?
Yeah,
within a JSON file.
Yep.
Exponentially explode when you try to tabularize them.
Right.
Yes. Exactly.
Which makes them very interesting to work with.
There's a lot of discovery
because it's technically it's a relational model, right? You're going to have these list of IDs.
It's not meant to be a table.
Yeah. It's not meant to be a table, and that's exactly why it's there, because developers use it.
Right. And the benefit to modern structures, right?
Yes.
Is they can look up in a point and have access to a whole bunch of information that they need for the application.
Yes.
As opposed to
querying 20 tables to get the same information. Yes.
Go hit a SQL Server.
Yes.
Where
exactly.
Need all
totally
that
agree.
before you get a result.
For anyone listening, if you have not dealt with APIs, it was not meant for you. the APIs that you try to connect to, you're at the mercy of whoever, in a sense, structure that.
The developer.
And a lot of times, and it's not meant for a tabular model. So you have to, in a sense, discover and then game plan and then try to execute.
It also depends on what kind of API you're hitting, though. Because there is this concept of like the API. That an API is programmatic. If you do like OData, it's actually an API still, but in this way, the OData feed is technically trying to build you a table. But I don't think companies are there yet. I don't think companies are like, oh yeah, we're gonna make this list of APIs, and then we're gonna think about how do people want to export our data, and then we'll give them like an OData feed that is table structured that they can then go use.
Right.
they're just not thinking that way yet. We're still thinking everything in this programmatic interface space. Like that's, anyways.
And Seth, yeah, you wrote about this too. The other API that very common is it's not even like a range or give me data. It's give me data for a set point or something specific thing. Like I remember one of the best articles I think I've ever read in Power BI is actually your only one on Yahoo Finance. I believe that was you, right?
That was Steve Campbell.
Never mind.
Steve Campbell did a Yahoo Finance.
I retract my statement about Seth.
I mean,
Power
yes, that was
well,
Steve Campbell.
I could have sworn I saw you as the author on that, but no, but it's basically like a lot of times you're not just getting like a date range of data, and if you are, you're limited. So you have to figure out how do you automate and scale that. Anyways, I think the point we're trying to say is when we're dealing with APIs outside of like a structured source, because when you connect to something in Power BI that's one of the 200 listed sources, it's going to come in a tabular way. It's going to come in a more or less structured way that, of course, there's going to be transformations to deal with, but something you're familiar with.
Yeah,
when you start going to APIs,
the success of an API is the results that it returns, right? Like if the API is set up in such a way that it's going to return a bunch of complex stuff to you, you're going to have problems in Power Query.
Regardless.
So, like, kudos to you for doing that in Power Query, because I wouldn't waste my time in there. Like I'd find a different systems to clean it and push forward. But if that's all you got,
it depends. It depends on how much data you're talking about, right? If you're talking about hundreds of millions, volumes matter here, right? So this, if you're hitting an API and you're getting just a handful, like 10, 15, 100 records out, okay, fine, Power Query it, like no big deal. But if you're talking millions of stuff, Power Query is going to fall over. You are clearly in like another system that you need to go invest in.
There are solutions for everything in an API. You just have to be willing to take the time to research Power Query and the source itself. Someone actually did ask, to your point, Mike. Someone asked a while ago about Freshdesk. Is there a connection to Freshdesk? That's actually a great example. That was one of the reasons we switched to Jira, because Freshdesk has no real good API, or at least a true API or connection to Power BI, that we're like, we need to pull this information. We couldn't.
So I believe Freshdesk does have an API reference. It does do something like some simple gets and posts. But again, if we think about I'm looking at the documentation right now for Freshdesk. It looks like a lot of this is around manipulating the data that's already inside Freshdesk. It's like
it's post.
Yeah, it's like I'm gonna grab this ticket,
right,
change it, and then post it back in. So it's like, hey, here's, again, this is the same thing with application protocols, right? This stuff is geared for you building another application that talks to Freshdesk in and out of it, as opposed to what is the reporting that I want to get out of Freshdesk. That's kind of a different question there.
So I get the sense that you guys have played with APIs. But
nah, I don't like APIs. Just kidding.
How many people
I actually really hate APIs.
So here's my question, right? Like a lot of these third-party connectors are forcing you through an API or like in some fashion, which I think is challenging for business users, though, right? Like how many of our audience do you actually think are using APIs, and why a connection of like, hey, how do I get Freshdesk to work? Because I have no idea how an API works, right? Or how to leverage one. I mean, it's an area I need to explore more, because the most I've interacted with APIs is just, singular requests through Postman, and I've made my way through that. But like in terms of an automated something out of Power Query, I think that's the biggest challenge that people, strike or hit up is, without getting a technical person involved, which typically isn't your Power BI person, right? How do you successfully connect to that data?
So
no, APIs are the Charlie Day "It's Always Sunny in Philadelphia" meme from Power BI, where you were literally all eyes are red and not now kind of thing.
Well, so let's talk about some of this. So Sean asked this question. He goes, a company we purchased is using Freshdesk, and then he goes, they're using it like their full CRM system, and he needs to get everything out of it. So here's where I think APIs present a challenge. An API is like a little window into what the database is actually doing. Behind the scenes, whatever that data model is, it's in Cosmos DB, unstructured, JSON, I don't really care what it is. There is some sort of data model that is the back end that supports the application. The API gives you like this little pinhole needle perspective, potentially, as to what the application's actually doing and how the data is stored. So, to Sean's comment, right? You may actually have to have 10 or 15 different API calls to pull out what you think is the table data. And then you have to understand, well, how do these things relate? And again, I'm looking at the documentation here, right? I have a time entry, I have a role, I have a group, I have an admin group, I have skills, agents, contacts. All these different things are potentially separate tables of information, and you're hoping to get back from the API enough information to rejoin the information in a relational database way that lets you see, when I select this user, I can see all their time entries. That's kind of how I like envision the world here. But you don't know the data model. You're basically shooting in the dark to go grab information and hopefully stitch it together when you're done.
So, random question then, right?
Yeah.
Isn't that if I'm giving you an API to go extract,
yep,
it doesn't that have to be part of my documentation of the API? Is
not necessarily
the behind it?
Not necessarily.
It's just here's the access to this.
Here's how to get a time entry. Here's how to get a role. Here's how to get a group. Like a lot of documentation on APIs are very specific for like these point lookups. Like you're looking up a single thing, but then you're like, well, how does a group relate to users? How does a time entry relate to a user?
Do it though.
Yeah, there's no data model.
You can pull like the time entries, then use that. Anyway, the last thing I'll say about APIs, and then
Tommy wants to change the topic here.
No. Well, I mean, we can keep talking about it, but again, we literally just, well, no, a lot of people don't use it. Let's keep talking about it.
No question. Seth was asking the question about, do people use it? And I would argue you're either using export to Excel or you're using an API if you don't have access to the actual data system. Like it's one of those two things. And so if you're using export to Excel, you're probably, I recommend, if you don't know how to do import through folders, highly recommend you do that, because at least you're getting some data extract from Excel in a format that you can kind of use.
What is your last API point?
My last get a developer involved.
Yes.
If you have a and because here's the thing with SSIS, there's actually a lot of
don't say SSIS. We don't use that anymore.
Some people
nobody should use SSIS anymore.
SSIS, yes, Tommy.
No.
Plugins.
No Tommy, what are you doing?
Logic apps with
Logic.
ADF,
Yes,
right?
exactly. You're saying Azure Data Factory. What you meant to say with Azure Data Factory?
We're still in the legacy traditions.
No, Tommy.
We'll do a poll.
Microsoft is not developed. Oh, don't get me started on SSIS. People think SSIS it is great. It was good in its day, but it is no longer cloud scale. It does not work in Azure as well as it does.
Once again, Mike, data sizes.
I know. I get it.
Tommy. Go ahead, Tommy. Finish your point.
For those who are working SSIS, the majority of you. So
everyone except Mike.
Yeah. If you need to upgrade, call Mike. So he'll happily help you.
I've had nothing but issues with every time I touch SSIS.
If you don't have the API in mind, which I don't, which takes me a lot longer, get someone who does. Ask them to look at what's available, and you can create some structured data that way, rather than spending too many hours if you need to. But if you're scaling something for your company, one with an API, it's also not local. So you're pulling every time in Power BI, which is a terrible problem. Like if you're trying to pull the last year, well, you have to pull that every time compared to something in SQL where it can be locally stored, where it can pull once a day. So anyways, getting me off my going. I'm being called an elder now.
No. James is right on. Tommy is hitting the point. He's talking to the elder Jedis of the data world, which was SSIS. I agree.
Moving on.
They're the Yodas of the world.
Wait. I'm an elder.
You're a Yoda.
I'm getting.
So let's talk about the benefits of SSRS. How about that?
SSRS. Oh boy, let's get going on that one.
Paginated for the win, man.
Paginated reports. Yes.
No, let's migrate into. I think a data source that many people are interact with, which is CRM systems.
Yes. Like Salesforce,
Dynamics and Salesforce.
Right? I like that one.
So I think what my experience, I haven't connected in Dynamics in a while, but like the experience I've had, I do to Salesforce right now, is very similar, and I'm interested in whether or not their move to forget the back end system is simplifying some of that. But these systems I've experienced are really easy to connect to. What throws people off immediately is they will pull in with them all of their linked relationships to other entities within them.
Mhm.
And the challenge is when you start like exploding your data sets on those links, things get really, really slow to the point where
Yeah.
you're refreshing for hours
Oh,
on
yeah.
a data set that's only a couple thousand rows or something. So that's the challenge in there, because immediately what that forces you to do is, much in the same way we were just talking about this with APIs, is you have to go look into those systems or use a third-party tool technically to rip out what the data model is within the CRM system to see how all of these entities have been like linked together, and what are all of these like
Yeah.
hang off lookup tables for metadata that is being like shown in the table itself. And the reason you have to do that is technically you then go in with Power Query, connect to those raw tables, and then you have to like rebuild all of these relationships again,
Yep.
because the connection in gives it to you, but it's just so dog slow that like a lot of times you can't continue to use those like linked connections.
Yeah, and it's amazing with Dynamics, for example. One, there's not really like a direct connection. You have to know some obscure URL that you have to find by going to multiple places, and then two, there's 500 tables, which
Oh
are
yeah.
all very ambiguous.
Yeah,
It's
But-
right.
insane.
But-
Because these systems are the veneer, right?
Yes.
So you
Right.
have these you have
Yep.
think about this. You have
Yes.
like initiatives of people that work within this ecosystem, and they're like, I'm going to create this project, and this is going to relate to this, and this is going to do this. Let's throw that away. Let's start
Right.
over. Let's do this. Right? You have so
Insane.
much stuff that's just like thrown into this system, and 75.
How do you
But
know what
but
to
that
use?
work, and this is the point though. That system, those tables, that structure works for the application. It
Right.
does not work
Right.
for analytics. And so that's, to me, this is
So-
where all this stuff breaks apart a little bit, because you're talking about two different use cases. This is application driven
No, I get it,
usage.
and we're just
Yeah,
plugging
yeah.
into that system.
Yeah,
of record.
exactly.
Now,
Right.
what I
Exactly.
would say is what I have found is a very easy way to not do that, right? Go in and understand the core system and extract it all. I mean, unless you're like fully having to like report on every aspect of that CRM system.
Which
If you
yeah.
just need a point connection,
Yep.
the reports. So in Salesforce, you can connect to the object
Yes.
or the reports. A report will act like a view that eliminates
Correct.
a lot of that
Right.
garbage.
That's a really good
because
suggestion.
You can do the joining. You can use the system, to say, I want this from the customer record. I want this
Yeah.
from the product record. I want this from the sales
Does
record.
it
Blah
have
blah
to be
blah.
pre-configured though?
It's you
reports?
There's
you
a
design the
UI
report.
to build your
Yeah.
report,
They have a
Right.
whole UI designer for
You-
report
and then-
building.
Yeah.
and then you just connect to that report. So
then it
like,
turns into a
you
table.
Eliminate all of the I have to go do these joins kind of things to extract data.
If a
So
BI
that, I
analyst
think,
has that
is super helpful.
ability. Yeah.
Correct. Or
If a BI
but
analyst
that's
has that
also one of
ability, which
those.
they probably don't.
But that's one of those areas where
Yeah,
it's like, hey, like CRM or Salesforce user, go build me a report that has this information in it,
Mm-hmm.
and then I'm gonna, connect that to something else. or whatever.
Correct.
I mean, obviously there could be holes in there because whatever, but
It's limitations
it
of how
does
the report.
simplify
Yeah.
the experience.
Yeah,
Right.
there's potential limitations of like how well their report builder allows
Right.
you to join data together, right? At some point, that's a limitation of the report builder. Sometimes report
Yeah.
builders were like, oh, you can't join this information this way, and then you have to build like two report pages and extract them differently, and then try and join them together. But again, it's all a veneer to try and figure out what is the actual data model that you're using to go stitch it back together. Because at the end of the day, you want your report to match what's in the application. If you've got 100
Now, it's
users in
been
your
a while.
application, you want to see that in
Been a
your report.
while, so I'm actually like opening my Power BI desktop right now.
Oh, boy.
because I know.
Oh, we're getting into it.
Oh no.
I know Salesforce.
Please hold.
Yeah,
I
please
think
hold.
Salesforce is better. Why are you
Salesforce
doing that?
has reports and objects.
You got to pay
But
for
what
it.
I'm being challenged on with Charlie is, does Dynamics
Have the same thing. Well, Dynamics also has Dataverse.
no? And that's where like it link, right? So, you don't
Yeah.
have that report layer,
Yes.
right? But Dataverse is a
it's set up-
cleaner version, or I can push data into
Right.
the
It is a
that
cleaner
structured
version.
form.
So what I think Dataverse is, so my understanding, again, I'm not 100% versed on this. We'd have to go talk to the Hot Dish Dynamics podcast, because they know a lot more about the dynamics stuff. I'll put a big plug in there for them. If you like following dynamics things, you may not know about them, but go Google Hot Dish Dynamics podcast, because they also have a great topics around a lot of topic around podcast, Power Apps, and the dynamic CRM world of things. But that being said, Dataverse, I think, is like we have tables, and the Dataverse adds a layer of computing that you can put on top of all those tables. So Dataverse allows you to query these rich tables, and my understanding is Dataverse and or Dynamics is technically just a SQL server on the back end with a bunch of tables into it. I think that's what's happening there. So I don't know 100%. I don't quote me on this, but I think that's why you're able to kind of shape this around. Yeah. Is Hot Dish Dynamics another Midwest podcast? I believe so. I think it is. Yes, it is. It's another Midwest podcast.
I do think, right, even as you look at these two different things, Salesforce is like, here, you can connect to our raw stuff. But why would you do that? Here's our reports, right? And Dynamics, Microsoft in typical fashion is like, go connect to it. You can do whatever you want.
The worst, I know. We initially said, why don't we tell our success stories? But we should have known this.
Yeah, there you go. And there's a little good and bad with all these, right?
Yes.
You know?
Yes.
The first time I think we were trying to connect this Dynamics, and it was like, oh, we need to see the BDMs in the accounts. And I like connected is like 500 tables. So, oh, this one says account. It was 192 columns, with 50 of those columns being relational tables, like those embedded tables.
Yep.
And it's like, but and again, you talk to someone in the CRM master, they're gonna have no idea what the table's showing. So it's amazing though, the Dynamics. Is there not a need for it?
I think is there not a need for
it? 100% there's a need for it.
Oh, okay. So the reason
what I think the question here is what is their need for? It's a more of a how hard is it going to be to connect to that system and get data out of it. So one of my major decision points whenever I'm talking with companies about what data systems they're going to acquire is, my first question is, how hard is it to get data out? And do I have to pay you to get data out? I know that for like Salesforce, there's a Jira. There is a much richer, there's a much richer export out of Jira as opposed to just using their standard export to Excels. But you have to pay them to get the data out. And I really disagree with the whole idea of, I'm using your tool to pay for it and I want to get the data out of it, and I have to pay you again to get the data out. Something in my inner self says that just seems wrong, that you're trying to make. I get it. You're paying for compute, right? You're paying to use the tool, and you're paying to get it out. It costs money to run a machine. I get it. But please just roll up the cost of the export out stuff to a certain degree in my normal cost. Like add $5 to my subscription.
There should be phases, and I'll tell you, I'm 100% aligned with this, because if I'm using your tool, and you don't do the bare minimum, which is like for the things I can do in your tool, give me the raw data.
Yes.
Give me the raw access stuff. Like, that should be a no-brainer at this point in time.
Yep.
The people you have to pay are third party.
There's so many BI tools. There's so many different things.
Yes.
Like you give me access to my data if I'm using your tool.
Yes.
Charge me more if you're doing things with that data and providing more value
beyond
like
that.
You're aggregating things, you're rolling it up, you're doing these different things. Like, if you're giving me more insights, that's a different story. But if I'm using your system and I don't have access to data, or like what I want to build, that's a big problem for me.
We man, this could lead into a few things. Even from the Dynamics point of view, if you want to set up properly, so there's actually documentation on Microsoft about how to create like the marketing report, and it gives a template. However, in order to do so, and this is Microsoft, you need an Azure blob storage. You need to have all these connections, which you have to pay for. It is not out of the box, even Microsoft to Microsoft.
Yeah, but again, this is one of these things. Like, if I had the reporting need, I can make the business decision to require that we go.
You still have to pay for it.
I'm okay with that, because I'm getting a level of stuff that I need out of the tool. So like, I think I think it's acceptable, right? Because at that point in time, even though I'm paying for the storage account to get all the things into it, at least I have everything, right? And then there is, I mean, to Dynamics credit, there is a data model that's documented that kind of tells you like, here's how all this stuff stitches together, right? And there is a data model that's being published that is the Dataverse, right? Here's how the Dataverse works, and here's the tables that are in there and how they stitch together. At a bare minimum, at least I'm given that. So yeah, it's fine. It may take me a bit to get through it, but at least I can get through that data model and reuse that data for my reporting pieces. I do want to transition one more. I do want to talk about one more, maybe version or a budding connector that people may or may not touch. I'm a huge fan of Databricks, and I see a data trend that is happening where everyone's going to be getting access to more and more data. Data systems are going to make more and more information. And our standard tooling that we have today will not cut it for SQL Server can't handle everything. And there are certain versions of SQL Server that will, SQL Server serverless will allow us to store information at the separating storage and compute. I think Spark, the Spark engine, has changed the way people think about compute on top of, in general, data. And I think this is a trend that's here to stay. I see Microsoft using Spark, the Spark engine, all over their platform, everywhere. There's a lot of this stuff going on. So I want to talk about just, connecting to Databricks from Power BI. That's another one that I think is very valuable here. I know, Seth, you've done a lot of work with that one.
Databricks is a core part of our systems, right?
Yeah.
And the reason is because, and I agree with you, because to a point we made earlier in the podcast, how applications interact with data is centralizing around unstructured methods.
Yes.
And Databricks is a phenomenal way in which you can connect to structured and unstructured. And if you're doing a lot of unstructured work, using Databricks as your ETL ingestion system and transformation and remaking sense of unstructured data into tabularized form to use in reporting is by far the best method I've found in doing that. And as a result, like, you have the same very similar ways in which you can interact with that data from a connection standpoint through Power BI, right? You build your views. You can use multiple different languages in Databricks, right?
Yes.
Scala, Python, Spark SQL.
Yes.
Like, so it's almost SQL-esque in, how, for all of us SQL folks, right? You're working on different engines. And I think the game changer that surprises me that most people aren't aware of is the Delta Lake. Delta tables within Databricks basically give you ACID transaction level interaction with your data.
Yeah.
Right. It's not the Wild West of like having to figure out how to create a data frame and open it up every single time. There's a lot that can be said to that solution. And I think they're even making it easier from an interface perspective, where they have more of a SQL type engine and interface that just makes the whole experience a lot easier. But we've been very, very happy with, setting up that connection and utilizing it through Power BI. It's immensely powerful, especially with really big data sets.
So a couple of things I think I'd like to point out here. There's some strengths of Databricks and what's going on here. One of the concepts we're talking about is the separation of storage and compute. That's what Databricks is doing. You have a blob storage container that stores the information, and you have a compute layer like Databricks or Spark that can read that at scale. And what I mean at scale is you can have 10, 15, 20 different machines reading a table of information and doing transforms on it. This is like taking the concept, for those who are like data sciencey or big data people, it's taking like Hadoop and applying like a compute layer on top of it. So super cool. There's a couple things in the chat window I want to just comment on, because I've done a lot of learning. I've been doing Databricks and development on Delta Lake essentially for probably about 3.5, 4 years now, purely working on this. And I've had some solutions that have been long running in this space for well over 5 years now. So I can comfortably say, after 5 years of kind of like playing around with this, there's a lot of really rich information in there. What I would say is, here's some observations high level, right? The first thing you got to do when you're talking about data warehousing, and this people can't say, oh, this is different. It's not. This is the same data warehouse you've always built. It's just structured slightly different. There's a couple key fundamentals that change. Your Databricks is your data warehouse. How you model that data inside your data lake is your data warehouse. So don't let anyone tell you different. It's a modern data architecture. It's still a data warehouse. Don't let that fool you. In addition to that, I would also say I'm not a huge fan of directly connecting from Power BI directly to views that are made inside Databricks.
I agree with that.
So while it does work, and it works very well at some fairly large pieces of data, one area that I think I would kind of recommend you test out for your data or your organization would be, oh boy, this is like the free consulting space here. So one recommendation I would make is
the paid version.
Create Delta tables for sure. The first thing you do is you take that raw data, JSON form, flat tables, whatever you do, and you move it into a Delta table as quickly as possible. You mature your data through what Databricks would call the bronze, silver, gold layers. But then when you're done, write all your data to a final consumable, quote unquote, table, Delta table, inside Databricks. And what I like right now as a pattern is using SQL Serverless to go read that data table, that Delta table, and then load data to Power BI using Synapse and use their SQL Serverless. One, it keeps the cost down really low because SQL Serverless is an on-demand consuming, how many terabytes of data you consume. I think it's like $5 per terabyte or something like that of how much files you touch. But I feel like the connections are a little bit more reliable. I feel it's a bit faster, and it's SQL now, right? So now I take the ownership away from Databricks and give it back to a Microsoft product. Power BI should definitely connect to SQL Serverless. SQL Serverless should be the handler between how to read the Delta table and the Delta tables inside your lake. So that would be just kind of like my general guidance there. I think that architecture is pretty solid. I've been using it now for like about a year and a half now. I feel like it's good. It works well. So that would be just my general recommendations around Databricks, data lakes. There's a whole other topic in this in general that's probably outside of the scope of this conversation.
Yeah. Two key points that we've learned over time are, I agree with you. Like views are a great starting point when you don't know your schema real well, right?
Totally agree.
Because you can adjust it easily. But when you get to that point, for sure, incur the storage cost and hit a table, things are going to be a lot faster.
Yes.
In your refreshes, etc.
Don't put a lot of joins in your view either.
Right, but you're also adding that as part of your ETL then.
Correct.
Right?
Yes, it is.
Refreshing that table. We haven't done the SQL Serverless part to access that yet, but the big thing we have learned is you don't need to keep your cluster on all the time, which is a huge, when you're talking about Databricks, it's a different method of interacting with finance and in general, because it's a service, right? You don't own the infrastructure. And now you're paying for something that you can scale up and scale down. So cognizant of cluster costs, the more data you push around, the more you'll spike. So setting those cluster sizings is really important. But in terms of that connection, as long as Power BI has the appropriate permissions set up in Databricks, it can spool up the clusters for refresh, and then you can turn those off.
Yeah. For those of you who don't know, there's a Raphael is noting here in the thread. Great comments here. The data lakehouse architecture is really where you want to spend your time researching. I have found really good value from the lakehouse architecture, and also looking through a lot of the Databricks. Databricks, in my opinion, is leading the helm, and Microsoft in this space is playing catch up. Databricks is a huge company. They are across all clouds, and I love this too. Stuff you write in Databricks, you could use it in AWS, Google Cloud Platform, or you could go into Azure and use it there as well. So it's a very, if you're trying to not be vendor locked in, there's one vendor I would lock in with would be Databricks, because they are thinking about this stuff correctly. And so I really, really enjoy this Lakehouse architecture. So read up on that. There's actually a really rich book that Databricks has put out with Bill Imvol, who's the huge database guy. He's talking about the Lakehouse architecture.
The other benefit to that, right, is it's cloud infrastructure, right? Like it allows you to connect to all of these systems. And if you're in an organization that has many different locations or different components of the company, like it's the centralized place where you can munge all that data together. It's a phenomenal solution when you have to scale that way.
I'm going to call out one more thing here. Rafa is asking another question, and I apologize about your name if I'm getting it wrong. You asked the question, Azure Databricks or Spark and Synapse? 100% Azure Databricks. Spark and Synapse is not mature enough. They're still playing catch up. And I would 100% push you more towards the Databricks side. If you're doing some light Spark things, very light, maybe you could just dabble in Synapse. But I would not do machine learning there. I would not use it for large ETL jobs. It's just not handling the capabilities that Databricks brings to the table.
I think the one of the things I've heard in the past is like think about those as two different things, right? In Databricks, you're going to always be on the most recent Spark cluster, right? In Synapse, like this is the old DW. Their concerns are focused more about that data warehouse infrastructure, and they're not so focused on staying as up to date with those, newest versions of the runtime.
Yeah.
So you're always going to be slightly behind. And they're certainly making improvements, but it kind of two different nuances there.
I found the book. Thank you, Dave, for catching me on David, for catching me on the Bill Inmon. I think is how you say his name. But Bill has a book called Building the Data Lakehouse. Highly recommend that book. I have a digital copy of it. I'm going to link right now. Here, the book right here. So this is from Bill. This is Building the Data Lakehouse. Highly recommend it. There's a lot of great patterns. This was made in collaboration with Databricks, which again I think is leading the helm in a lot of this space. And this really removes the need for SSIS and kind of other legacy packages that really, I think, the data volumes are going to get bigger regardless. That's a trend we know is happening. The next 10 years are going to make more data than the last number of years that we've had since computers have been around. It's going to get larger. So we're going to need different tools to handle larger and larger volumes of data. So I think this is another good architecture that I really like.
If you like the 5-hour series on this, follow up after on Databricks, and Mike will gladly talk about this for the next 10 hours.
Oh, dude, this is my bread and butter right now, baby. This is
I know.
Power BI is the gateway to all of this under the hood engineering that needs to happen for data. I mean, really is, right? You want to use Power BI, I say, point me to your data warehouse, and people will be like, well, we don't have a data warehouse. Well, that's where we need to start, because I'm not doing, and someone else earlier in the chat was talking about, be very cautious and wary when you're doing a whole boatload of data cleansing in Power Query, because you're kind of localizing it to that particular Power Query, that particular data model. You really do need to start thinking about, if you're doing a lot of that, you might want to start considering trying to pull it upstream and build the data warehouse, because it's not going away. You need to have it. It's going to have to be part of your plan as you grow your analytics team. One last question here from James. Tips for people in orgs who aren't big enough to merit Databricks, but want to start using it for the future. I believe Databricks, and particularly the Spark engine, is a local installable that you could do on stuff. So you potentially could go download a Spark cluster and start playing around with it on your own. You can start writing code inside Azure Synapse. If you have Azure Synapse, you can do Spark code writing there. Just be aware, it's going to be a bit slow, and it's not going to be as robust as I think I've seen inside Databricks. Databricks also does give you a free trial on some stuff. So I think there is a free trial for Databricks that is out there that you can just go get started. So if your organization doesn't have it, you could at least start to play with it for a little bit as well. I would say, as a general recommendation, if you have access to Azure, you can turn on Databricks, and you can turn it on with a single node cluster, which would allow you to at least play with it for, like, I would call it maybe like $1 or $2 an hour. So if you're trying to learn it, and that's part of your learning goal of your plan as you as an employee, you have the ability of going out and kind of playing around with it a little bit. And I recommend you start there, because it can always scale up larger if you ever need to do something bigger than that. Anyways, I know we're at time. Seth's got to go make money and be business, go fix things at his company. So with that, we all thank you very much for attending. We appreciate you guys listening to the podcast. Our only ask for those of you who enjoy the podcast, even if you didn't, give us a recommendation somewhere. Tell someone else, hey, these guys are a bunch of goofballs. We learned a little something here. And just, to some coworkers or on social media, if you don't mind, just give us one little shout out and say, hey, we liked it. This was a good episode. We learned something here. We appreciate your support, and we'll continue to keep doing these things. Tommy, where else can you find the podcast?
Yeah, if you want to find Mike Carlo's 10 video series on SSIS, he'll be doing that after this. So it's going to be larger than later.
So big, so big. I love it.
Follow us on Apple and Spotify. All of our episodes are previous. If you want to join the conversation live, you can do so Tuesdays and Thursdays, 7:30 in the morning. Follow Power BI Tips on LinkedIn and YouTube to see our future episodes. And again, Follow us on Apple and Spotify or anywhere you like podcasts.
We thank you all very much. We love the community. You guys are great. Thank you for the chat being very lively. It was great. It helped narrate a lot of the conversation today. We appreciate your engagement. Have a great week, everyone, and we'll see you on Thursday.